Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Nick Bowles, and today we're going to do a bit of a recruiting recap since the dust has begun to settle and things are looking a little more clear in terms of who is going where. There are still a few players out there who have not decided yet, mainly the top recruit left, who is a 5-star running back out of North Shore High School in Zachary Evans. He originally had committed and signed a letter of intent to Georgia, but then backed out of it. Georgia is still probably the odds-on favorite by a slim margin to land him. And then you also have Florida, A&M being the next two front runners after Georgia. And then Ole Miss and Tennessee are sort of there in the background as well, but it's still largely undecided where he will go. He would be a nice addition to any team, obviously being a 5-star and the number one running back in the country. But if I had to pick a team that he would help the most, I actually think that he would help A&M the most and probably get the most chance to play there, seeing as they only have 2 running backs on the roster and no commits. A&M could use the depth, and Zach Evans would probably get the most touches, I would think, out of A&M right out of the gate. Now, obviously, anywhere he goes, he's going to get an opportunity to play, so he obviously, as I said, would help any team, but it would be nice to see him go to A&M just because they are so thin at running back, and he probably would get a chance right away to get as many touches as possible. But other than that, we are going to get into perhaps who were the big surprises out of the 2020 recruiting class and who ended up being the biggest winners and biggest losers. And I have some interesting thoughts on who may have actually lost in terms of what they could have had versus where they ended up in terms of recruiting. As I sort of mentioned earlier, you know, your number one job is to recruit as a head coach in college. And so A&M is looking as if they are going to finish number 6. So Jimbo, again, is making the money that A&M is paying him in terms of at least being competitive in recruiting. He essentially has been top 10 in recruiting since he joined A&M. And so off the bat, in terms of the top teams, he is sort of surprising me the most, or I think he deserves the most recognition, maybe another way to put it. Georgia ended up leapfrogging Clemson and Alabama to number 1. They had a couple of good recruits there at the end that put them over the top. The other big surprise was Tennessee, who ended up being number 10 in the overall rankings for the nation. And they had a total of 13 4-stars and 9 3-stars. They barely eked out Oklahoma. You could essentially call it a tie. So for Tennessee to be ranked in the top 10, and they kept teams like Oklahoma or Oregon perhaps getting that number 10 slot, is pretty impressive for Tennessee, I think. They fell right behind Florida at number 8 and Texas at number 9. Those rankings are not surprising at all. Auburn at number 7, they keep having good recruiting classes year in, year out. So Auburn being at number 7, it was also, I think, a bit of a surprise. They were the 11th ranked class in 2019, so they only got better. As I mentioned, we had Oklahoma at 11, Oregon at 12, Miami coming in at 13, which I think is really good for them. Not to mention that they also picked up King from Houston, the transfer quarterback, and I think that's going to greatly help their offense, which has struggled the last couple years. Then we had Michigan at number 14, Penn State at 15. Washington at number 16, I think, is a little surprising. That's a good year from them. They had 1 5-star, 9 4-stars. Then we had Notre Dame at number 17. South Carolina and North Carolina coming in at 18 and 19, which I think is also very good years for them. Anytime you're in the top 20, I think that's good unless you are one of those top-tier programs. But all things considered, I think being in the top 20 for South Carolina and North Carolina, I think is something that they can be proud of. And we will talk about North Carolina a little more next segment and the job that Mack Brown has done, specifically as of late. Then we had Nebraska at number 20. Stanford at 21, I think, was a little surprising to me. Being just right out of the top 20 for Stanford, I think is more than acceptable for them and is probably recruiting a little bit outside of their ability. So I think they are doing pretty good at number 21, 6 4-stars, 16 3-stars. Then you have Florida State 22. I'm not too surprised with that. Kentucky 23. Again, Kentucky is slowly becoming a decent football program. They are steadily improving, it seems, year in and year out, and considering that they play in the SEC, I give them a lot of credit. So for them to be able to come in at 23, I would say overall is good for them. They can't be too displeased with that. Last year they were the 34th ranked team, so they made a big leap in terms of going from 34 to 23 in the nation. And it's also crazy that the 23rd ranked national recruiting class gets you only the 9th ranked recruiting class in the SEC. But again, that's pretty good for them. 24 at Arizona State. I am a little disappointed with that one. I thought perhaps they would do a little better with Herm Edwards and Marvin Lewis also joining the team. I thought that perhaps that would maybe jump them up a little bit. But 24, I guess overall, they can't be too disappointed. Wisconsin rounds out the top 25, and then after that, we sort of drop off in terms of the bigger name schools. Michigan State coming in at 43, that one really hurts. I think a lot of this has to do with the coaching issues that they have going on right now. Last year they were the 33rd ranked team, and this year they are the 43rd ranked team. Pittsburgh at 44, that one hurts a little bit, I think. Although last year they were the 59th ranked team nationally, so 44 is a drastic improvement. I just thought perhaps they would have a little bit of a better year, considering I thought they played above their level a little bit last year and had some close losses. That really could have helped them in their rankings had they won them. Oklahoma State at 45, that seems like that hurts a little bit. I think you'd be expecting to get a little higher if you're Oklahoma State. And then Texas Tech at 49 and Missouri at 50 round out the top 50, and I'll just stop there. But when we come back, I'm going to get into more of the winners and losers, specifically the job that Mack Brown has done over the last week or so and what he is doing to set up the 2021 class. And I will also talk about 2021 recruiting later on in this segment as well. So we're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned and we'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast. This segment, I want to go over the biggest winners and losers from the 2020 class. And right off the bat, I'm actually going to pick one that may surprise you a little bit, and that is Alabama. Alabama had a few recruits slip out of their hands, I think, late in this season. Most notably was the defensive tackle McKinley Jackson, who ended up going to A&M over Alabama, which was sort of one of the bigger surprises on traditional signing day. May have been the biggest surprise, in all honesty. But I thought it was big for a couple reasons. The first being that Alabama did not sign anyone or any notable players or any ranked recruits on traditional signing day. And because of this, Georgia signed some 3-stars and some other recruits once traditional signing day started that essentially put them into the top spot or the number one ranking in the nation. And the reason why I think this is sort of significant, and again, we're talking about Alabama and Georgia here, so it's not as if these teams are hurting for recruits, but Georgia has now had the number one recruiting class 2 out of the last 3 years, and Alabama was the other one during that time period as well. But I do think it's interesting, I guess, for just sort of a mental note, or perhaps even just a confidence booster, that Alabama is sort of staggered here the last couple years, because before this, you'd have to go all the way back to 2010 to find a recruiting class that doesn't have Alabama as the number one team in the nation. And so essentially they've had a stranglehold on the best recruiting classes for the last 8 years now. And to see such a big commit, a 4-star defensive lineman, pick A&M over Alabama, and then have Georgia beat Alabama 2 out of the last 3 years for the top recruiting class, I guess it's a nice note to see that Alabama has at least slipped a little bit in the last couple of years. And while I'm sure they will always be in the top 3 or 5 until Saban decides to leave, or some kind of unforeseeable tragedy or mishap happens at their university that brings a death penalty on them or something like that in terms of violations, then I don't think Alabama has too much to worry about. But it is nice to see them not in the top spot, and the way that they sort of lost that top spot this year in terms of having a team like A&M play spoiler a little bit from them getting that top spot, I just think is nice to see for college football. I think at the end of the day, you want parity. You want to be a little uncertain of what the outcome will be. And so just to see Alabama sort of lose in that fashion, I think is a little bit of a side note to take and to notice. Again, Alabama is always going to be in the top of recruiting, but if they can be a not for sure number one every year and maybe just a for sure top 5, then I think overall that's good for college football, just in terms of parity and in terms of having other teams to maybe take a chance or be able to claim the throne every once in a while, which we have seen in more recent history with Clemson being able to beat Alabama a couple times. And so I just think it's good to see overall, and I'm not trying to be an Alabama hater, which I know there are plenty of them out there, and for good reason. Alabama has absolutely dominated college football for the last 10 years or so. And that will also roll into who I think the biggest winners were in terms of 2020 and looking forward to 2021, and that is North Carolina. And why North Carolina sort of ties into the Alabama point is that Mac Brown was able to steal a 4-star quarterback who had committed to the 2021 class of Alabama and got him to flip to committing to North Carolina. And he is the number 6 pro-style quarterback in the country. So he is obviously a talent to have, and any team would like to have him on their roster. It goes a little bit deeper than that. North Carolina's 2021 class now has 9 commits, 8 of which are 4 stars. And to take one away from Alabama like that and be at a quarterback of all positions is just another sign that I think there is beginning to be more parity in the NCAA. And it just shows how important recruiting is and who your head coach is and who is at the helm of running your football program and how are they going to get these recruits. I think if you're North Carolina, to see that you have 8 4-stars already for next year, a year down the road in 2021, and you just stole a 4-star quarterback from Alabama, that has got to make you feel good that Mack Brown knows what he's doing, and it's almost like riding a bike, and you are hoping he can get back on that bike and sort of get North Carolina up to speed as fast as possible and perhaps start challenging Clemson for ACC championships. Who knows? I know that sounds crazy, but if he keeps recruiting like this and if he is going to keep consistently getting 4-stars, then I don't see why someone like Mack Brown, with his sort of pedigree as a coach, could go and challenge Dabo Swinney at Clemson every so often, or maybe start doing it on a regular basis. Right now, North Carolina has the number 4 ranked class for 2021, and I believe they have not even been in the top 10 since before the year 2000, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. So North Carolina is desperate for a change, and it looks as if Mack Brown is going to be the person that brings that change about. This is exactly why they hired him. This is exactly why they brought him in. And if he can keep doing this, which he has shown he can do the last couple of years, then there's no reason why we shouldn't expect to begin to see the fruits of that labor or the fruits of his recruiting begin to play a difference in the ACC in terms of possibly always being on the heels of Clemson, who is going to be good for the foreseeable future until Dabo leaves, much like Alabama will probably always be good until Saban leaves. As long as these coaches are sort of bringing their pedigree in terms of recruiting and then being able to do it on the field, then that is exactly what you pay them for, and that is exactly what you are expecting. And so forget what the record will be next year for Mack Brown. Honestly, he could go out and have a below 500 year. Now, I think they're going to add a win this year, so I think they're going to have a good season overall. But if he has an okay year this year, I mean, I would only expect next year to improve at the very least, even if he slips up this year. He's got the talent coming in. He obviously knows the X's and O's. He's been there, done that. And I think this is a sign of good things to come for North Carolina. I expect them within the next 2 to 3 years to be able to put a product on the field that will get a lot of people's attention and will at the very least have Clemson looking over their shoulder. I don't say that lightly. Clemson is a very good team. So to say that Clemson will begin to have to look at North Carolina a little differently is really saying something. While I've already said I'm excited to see what North Carolina will do on the field this year, I'm already sort of interested to see what Mack Brown is able to do going forward with the talent that he is able to bring into North Carolina. I just wanted to touch on that. Again, I don't think Alabama necessarily is a quote-unquote loser when it comes to recruiting, but it is at least nice to see a little chink in the armor be taken away and to have them at least not be the number 1 recruiting class 10 years in a row, which would be quite something. I put them as my biggest loser only for the precedent that it is setting that they didn't get the number 1 recruiting class and the fact that they lost to an interconference opponent like Texas A&M and have Georgia leapfrog them for the second time in 3 years, I think is also good. Again, they're losing to their SEC opponents, so it would be one thing, I guess, if you went to Ohio State or Oregon or Clemson, but we are seeing schools within the SEC itself begin to challenge or at least affect Alabama in some kind of way that will only give them problems in the future, hopefully. And again, I'm excited for North Carolina. I think North Carolina and their fans and their students should also be very excited for the possible future that Mack Brown is going to bring there. And so far, it looks like he's putting in the foundation, so there's no reason to think that they can't do it, or they can at least make some noise in the future and maybe win a couple ACC titles and take 1 or 2 away from Clemson in the near future. So When we come back, I'm going to keep up with the recruiting recap. We'll take a look at some other players and teams, some other people that I was surprised at, and continue with our winners and losers of the 2020 recruiting class. So stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast. We're doing a quick rundown of where teams ended up for the 2020 recruiting class, minus the last couple of decisions that will probably come down in the next couple of weeks, most notably from five-star Zach Evans, who is a running back out of North Shore High School in Texas. But barring that, essentially the dust has settled, as I mentioned earlier, and so we are going over who won and maybe some of the more disappointing recruiting classes and just overall how I think teams did. I've already sort of mentioned in a roundabout way how I think Alabama was a loser this year only because they didn't get the top spot and they sort of had their last big recruit go to A&M over them, and how they also have had Mack Brown steal a four-star quarterback for them for 2021. And I think it just shows a little chink in the armor. I think it just shows a little bit of a stumble, and some other teams were able to pick their spots and knock Alabama out of that top spot. And for more of just a mental note, I think it's significant. Again, because, they finished number 2 in the nation. There's really nothing to be disappointed about. But I thought more for just a precedent it's set that I thought Alabama was sort of a loser this year. Another winner I have is A&M, and I won't talk too much about them because I've sort of mentioned how I think coaches, their main duty is to recruit, and Jimbo has done that. Jimbo had a top 5 class last year. He's looking at the number 6 class this year, so we expect him to only continue to do good things, and I think A&M getting the 6th spot sort of just solidified that Jimbo can recruit, and he's going to keep recruiting while at Texas A&M. And so both North Carolina and Texas A&M, I think, should be very happy about their trajectory overall in terms of where their programs are probably headed based on the jobs their head coaches are doing simply at recruiting. Forget the X's and O's and all of the in-between, but just based on how they are recruiting, I think those two schools have a future that they should be very excited about and should be looking forward to in terms of what they think they might be able to accomplish in the future. And both of them will have their work cut out for them. A&M's going to have to eventually get over Alabama or LSU, and perhaps Georgia as well now. North Carolina is going to have to compete against the Clemson Tigers every year, without question. So they definitely have their work cut out for them, but they are at least putting in the correct foundations and are taking the first correct couple of steps in order to achieve something as great as beating those couple of teams I just mentioned. And so we'll keep going down the list with who had, I think, good and disappointing years. I kind of mentioned Auburn. I think for them, being number 7 is pretty remarkable. I think that's a great job for them. They had no 5 stars, but they were able to rack up 16 4 stars And essentially, I look for them to also have a bright future, and they should be excited about what they will be able to accomplish in the future. If Bo Nix can continue to develop at quarterback, and that defense is going to continue to be stingy and amongst the best in the nation, then I think Auburn probably has a reasonable claim to at least throw their name in the hat for some teams who might be able to do some big things this year coming up and in the near future. Now, 7 I think is a little high for them on average, so I don't expect them to be number 7 again next year. I think they'll probably be just outside of the top 10 or around it again. But number 7 I think is an up year for them, so next year will be interesting to see what they are able to do. Right now for 2021, just looking at Auburn, they are at number 18. They have 2 4-stars and a 3-star recruited, just as a side note. If we keep going down the list, Florida at number 8, that makes sense. Texas at number 9, that makes sense. I think Texas will probably begin to pick up their recruiting. I know last year they had a very good class, but the year before, when they had the coaching change, was a bit of a down year for them. But I think Texas being in the top 10 in recruiting every year, it will probably go back to being a norm. So number 9 for them is okay. And again, number 10, Tennessee, this was the one I was surprised at. No big 5-star recruits, but they have 13 4-stars and 9 3-stars. I think for Tennessee to come in at number 10, especially in a down year and when their program is not doing perhaps as good as they think they should be doing, I think number 10 is very good for them. I think they should be happy that they got number 10, as well as the players that they got as well. They got a very good pro-style quarterback in Harrison Bailey. They got an awesome defensive tackle in Amari Thomas. And it looks like they are hopefully going to be putting that program on the right track, and to have another team in the SEC come around and be able to give some good competition, I think is only going to make the SEC better overall, and would be nice to see another team begin to throw their name in the hat. Perhaps what A&M is doing in the SEC West, Tennessee would probably like to start building something similar in the SEC East. Perhaps being that third team to consistently come out of the SEC East behind Georgia and Florida every year would be a good spot for them. Just as I think A&M is hoping to be that number 3 team behind LSU and Alabama, and perhaps Auburn mixed in there as well. And so I think if you could have Tennessee do that and begin to put themselves on the same trajectory as A&M, then that would be a good thing for the parity of the SEC. And then just to go on, I really like Oregon's class. Even though they're sitting here at number 12, they had a total of 22 recruits, and 3 of them were 5-stars, which is an amazing average. They had 7 4-stars and 12 3-stars. And the other player that I forgot to mention that Alabama sort of had slipped through their hands on traditional signing day was Jason Jones, who ended up going to Oregon. So again, we had a couple of big defensive tackles pick other schools than going to Alabama. And it's just another note to take in terms of Alabama perhaps not being the for sure lock that they have been in the past. Jason Jones ended up going to Oregon over Alabama, which was another big signing change that happened. And both of those signing changes were against Alabama and in favor of other big programs. After Oregon, we had number 13, Miami, which is very good for them. If we can start to see Miami in the top 15 every year, then I think that is a good thing for college football overall and for the U. In the next couple of segments, we will finish out the top 50 teams in terms of where they ended up in recruiting for the 2020 class. And then in the very last segment, we will take a quick look at 2021 and see how that is shaping up already as we look to the future in terms of teams and who they're recruiting and who they've landed commits from and what that might look like in the college football landscape over the next couple of years. So stay tuned and we'll be right back.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, welcome back to the next segment of the GSMC College Football Podcast. We are going to continue our rundown of the top 50 teams in terms of national rankings for recruiting. We left off with number 13, Miami, and we're going to pick it up from there. The next team on the list is Michigan, and I feel like for them, while historically that might be a little low, I think that's a good spot for them. If Michigan can consistently be in the top 15 until perhaps they make a move or two or begin to put some good seasons together, then for them to be in the top 15, I think is something they should be content with. Obviously, if you're Michigan, you want to be in the top 10 every year minimum in terms of your historic rating and what you historically have been able to do. But for now, being in the top 15, I think is good for them. Then we come up to Penn State at number 15, and considering that I am pretty high on Penn State this year coming up, I was hoping or expecting perhaps a little bit of a better year. Maybe next year they will be able to hit a home run in terms of recruiting. But number 15 for them is not bad. Last year they were number 12, so a bit of a fall off, but I think next year they have a good chance at perhaps getting in the top 15 again. And if you're Penn State, you at least want to be in the top 15, so I think this is okay for them. I was hoping maybe for them to kind of have a surprise jump in recruiting considering their recent success, but overall, you can't be too upset if you're Penn State at number 15. Then we had Washington at number 16. And this one was a bit of a surprise as well for me. They did get one 5-star who is a defensive end, Savell Smalls, out of their home state of Washington, who was the 29th ranked player nationally, so that's quite a good get for them. They also picked up a really good 4-star wide receiver in Jalen McMillan. He was number 12 at the wide receiver position, so that is also a very good signing for them. He was 67th nationally. And overall for Washington being in the top 20, I think you got to take that if you're Washington. I think if they could take being consistently in the top 20 every year, they would probably make a deal with you. So for them, being number 16 this year, I think was an extremely high year for them, and they should be pretty proud of that. Then at number 17, we have Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's recruiting has been a little lackluster the last couple years. They were 16 last year, so they only dropped one spot, but they do look as if they're expected to have a pretty good year next year, the way it's shaping up already. But last year they were number 16, and the year before that they were actually number 10 in the nation, as well as being number 10 in the nation the year before that as well in 2018. And so they've always kind of fluctuated between number 10 to 15, so overall for them to be at number 17 is a little bit of a disappointment. I do think that they are going to do good this year coming up, as well as I think they are building a pretty good team going forward for the future. So I would like to think that next year they will probably go ahead and have a much better recruiting class. As I said, next year they already have the 5th ranked class. Now obviously that's a bit of a ways out, but to start off at number 5 for right now, looks like you're at least going to have a good year. They have a total of 7 commits for 2021, and 6 of those commits are 4 stars, so that's a pretty good average. Just about any team would take that, much like North Carolina having a total of 8 commits, 7 of which are 4 stars as well. Then we get to South Carolina at 18. I'm pretty impressed with this one. I think being in the top 20 for South Carolina is a good place to be at for them. They should be pretty happy with that. We kind of already went over North Carolina at number 19. Their 2021 class is looking to be pretty impressive, as we mentioned earlier. At number 20, we have Nebraska. Last year, Nebraska was the number 17th ranked class, and they've always seemed to fluctuate around the number 20 team in terms of recruiting each year, so being number 20 this year is about right for them. Number 21 is Stanford, and so I went back and actually looked at Stanford's recruiting history. Every once in a while, they'll have a bad year, number 40 or number 50 or something like that, but for about the last 6 years, except for maybe 1 or 2 seasons, they've always been number 15 or somewhere around that. And I was a little surprised by that, actually. I had not realized that the recruiting had been that consistently high for them. I always thought they would be top 25, top 30 maybe. Obviously, the fact you're a prestigious school in terms of education standards, you're going to be able to attract some players that other schools perhaps would never have the chance to by having that kind of pedigree. But overall, for a school like Stanford to be around the top 15 or 20 every year is pretty impressive, and I was not quite aware of that. So kudos to them. Unfortunately, next year they do not seem to have any commits yet, so they need to get that together. I'm not exactly sure how the early signing period has worked for Stanford in the past, but I'm sure they will get around that top 15, top 20 ranking as long as they can continue to do what they do. Then number 22, you have Florida State, which is a little disappointing for such a historic program, but that's about where they've been at the last couple years. And then again, number 23, I had Kentucky, and I think that's very good for Kentucky. Last year they were 34. This year they're 23. Next year it looks as if they'll be back around that 34 area, just looking at where they're ranked right now. But for Kentucky, I think being number 23 is very good for them. If they can consistently be in the top 25 as a new norm, and as their program seems to incrementally get better every year and sort of inch towards being a respected college football program as well as basketball, then I think you'll take that if you're a Kentucky fan. And considering you're in the SEC and you're going to have a ways to go either way, I think for you to consistently at least be respected in the SEC is somewhere you would like to be at as a program before you have to take that obvious next big leap in terms of maybe doing something big in the SEC. So number 23 for them, I think that's pretty impressive. And then to round out the top 25, we had Arizona State and Wisconsin. And I thought Arizona State would be a little higher this year due to the pedigree of having Herm Edwards. But last year they were number 28, and the year before that they were 36. So they have gotten better every year. And with Herm Edwards there, along with Marvin Lewis, I expect them to be able to walk into some living rooms going forward and get some much better recruits. But for them to be in the top 25, I think for Arizona State, where they're at now, they'll take that. But I think going forward, they would like to crack the top 20 every year. And then after Arizona State, we had the Wisconsin Badgers, rounding out the top 25. And last year they were number 29, and the year before that they were 46. So over the last 3 years they have gotten incrementally better. And according to the 2021 standings, they're already ranked number 7. And so it looks as if they're going to have another good year recruiting for them next year, maybe even higher than what they were able to do this year with the number 25 spot. My big takeaways from the top 25, again, North Carolina being able to do what they have done the last year or so under Mac Brown and the recruiting he had last year and what it looks like they're going to be doing in 2021, I think is the biggest takeaway from the top 25 in 2020. That North Carolina looks like they are on a trajectory to be a much improved college football program, and it will be with Mac Brown at the helm. Again, the other big one was A&M at number 6, sort of just being able to duplicate a good year under Jimbo, I think is a good sign for them that he will be able to continue to do what he is doing the last couple years. And then the other big takeaway was sort of not so much that Alabama's not number one, but the way that they lost it and who they lost it to. And the fact that they had a couple recruits sort of slip through their fingers on traditional signing day, and one went to an SEC opponent and the other one went to Oregon, I think is just an interesting note to take. I don't think that's normal in terms of having players kind of decommit from Alabama last second like that and sort of knock them out of the top ranking, allowing Georgia to leapfrog them and have the best ranked recruiting class for now 2 out of the last 3 years. So those are just my takeaways from top 25. Next segment, I'm going to run down the 25 through 50 real quick, and then we'll take a look at 2021 and how it's shaping up already. So stay tuned and we'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. We're going to do 26 through 50 real quick on the national recruiting rankings this year for 2020. We will pick up with number 26, Georgia Tech. I think for them this is very good. Georgia Tech has not really been a contender or much of a team the last 5 to 10 years. So for them to be number 26, I think is definitely an overachieving ranking for them, and they should be very happy with that. Georgia Tech last year was the 50th ranked class, just making the cut for the top 50. So 26 for them. So 26 for them is much improved. Next year they're already looking as if they will have a sort of comeback to earth year as they're ranked 44 in early rankings for 2021. Their best player that they signed this past year was Jahmyr Gibbs out of Dalton, Georgia, so a home state signee. He was a 75th ranked player overall and number 8 at his position at running back. So Georgia Tech had a very good class in terms of where they are typically ranked. But next year they probably will come back down to earth and be within the top 50, top 40 to 50, somewhere around there. Number 27 is Mississippi State. I think this is about right for them. 28 is TCU. That seems about right. 29 is the Utah Utes, and I think that that's pretty good for them. Coming off a really good year, you would sometimes hope your classes are probably a little bit higher, but for Utah to be in the top 30, I think is overall acceptable for them and somewhere they like to be at. Number 30 is Arkansas. That feels about right. 31 is Maryland. I think that's a pretty good ranking for them. They would probably take being in the top 30 every year if you could give it to them. Number 32 is UCLA. I think as time goes on, that will probably improve. Last year they were number 40, so they are already sort of on the up and up in terms of recruiting. I think that program is going to slowly get back on pace and hopefully be challenging for the top 25, top 20 pretty consistently going forward, but as of late they've had a bit of a struggle with it. But I think UCLA going forward should only hope for better things. Number 33 is Purdue. That seems about right. I would maybe hope they'd be a little higher, but 33 seems about right. 34 is Ole Miss. That sounds about right. And then number 35 is Iowa. And Iowa's put out some pretty competitive teams in recent history, and so 35 does feel a little low for them. If I was them, I'd be hoping to crack that top 30 or top 25 year in and year out due to the recent success that they've had. And they have slightly improved from last year where they were ranked 41, and they are shaping up to have a top 10 class next year if we look at just where they are projected to be right now for 2021. They have them as the 9th ranked team, so they're off to a good start for next year. But Iowa, I think, is a little disappointing at 35. I think if you're Iowa, considering you've had some pretty decent teams in the last 5 years or so, I would think you would be hoping to get better than 35. So I think that's a little low for them, just my sort of initial reaction. 36, you have Colorado. That's good for them. As bad as Colorado has been in recent history, for them to be 36, I think is a bit of an overachieving recruiting class. They had 3 4-stars, which I think is good for them. Pretty high average in terms of the other teams that are ranked around the same level as them. The number 37 is West Virginia. This feels a little low as well, but I'm not necessarily surprised. 38 is Minnesota Golden Gophers, which I sort of have the same reaction as I did with Iowa, that due to them being a much better ball club over the last couple of years, I would think that you could do better than 38. Last year they were number 45, and they are already shaping up to have a top 15, top 20 recruiting class next year for 2021. So they are on the up and up, but in terms of being 38 this year, I would just expect them to be able to put together a little bit better of a recruiting class than that. But at the same time, it is Minnesota. They've come a long way in recent history. So I guess maybe their historic record or the fact that they are not quite a household name in terms of football probably is holding them back just a little bit. Number 39 is Cal. That seems about right. I would maybe expect a little bit higher. Number 40 is Cincinnati. I think that's decent for them. They're probably happy with that. 3 4-stars, which is respectable around that level. 41, we have NC State. I think that's pretty good for them. They should be happy with that. 2 4-stars, 18 3-stars. Number 42 is Louisville, and that feels about right for them. I think that might be actually a pretty decent recruiting class for them overall. They signed 25 3-stars, so they are hoping to fill a lot of spots probably with those 3-stars and get their team average up, considering that they probably do not sign a lot of 4 or 5-stars. Then at number 43, which is one that is sort of understandable, that's Michigan State at number 43. Again, they've had some coaching issues come up recently, as well as just sort of being on the downhill slope. I know that technically they have had overall some pretty good success in the last 5 to 10 years, or at least in terms of being a football program. They've made some big improvements, but they definitely have underwhelmed the last year or two. Last year they were the 33rd ranked team nationally in terms of recruiting, and this year they fell back 10 spots. So they are a little bit on the downtrend, if you were to ask me. Then at 44 we have Pitt. I was expecting them to perhaps be a little higher only because they seem to be on the precipice, or they seem to be only a couple games away from having a very good year here or there. You still have to win the games put before you, but I feel like Pittsburgh has been pretty close to having some good years in the last few years or so. But due to a loss here, a loss there, a close game here and a close game there, they just have not been able to do it. So if I was them, I would expect to get a little higher than 44. But last year they did come in at 59 overall in the nation, so 44 for them is a big improvement. And right now the projections have them having at least a top 30 class next year, if that holds true. Then at 45 was Oklahoma State. I thought this was a little disappointing as well. Just the fact that you can recruit so much out of Texas and the talent that Oklahoma already has in terms of a state and high school football. I would think that 45 is a low number for Oklahoma State. Last year they were ranked 38, so they did fall a few steps in terms of where they were ranked, and next year it looks like they will be out of the top 50 in terms of what the 2021 class projection is. Then to round it out, we had Iowa State at 46. I think overall that's good for them. 47 at Northwestern. I think overall that's good for them. 48 for Virginia. 49 for Texas Tech. And 50 is Missouri. If you are Virginia, Tech, and Missouri, I would think you expect to be a little higher just because you are recruiting out of the SEC for Missouri. You're recruiting out of Texas for Texas Tech. And Virginia's had some decent ball clubs the last couple years. And so 48 might be about right for them. That actually seems about right now that I think about it. But being that you are one of the bigger names, I guess you could say, overall in terms of just a college or a university, I would think 48's a little bit low for you. Last year they had the 39th ranked class, which feels a little bit more right, and this year they are 48 and looking to be around 40 next year as well. So that's going to round out the top 50 for recruiting this past year in 2020. Most of the high school players are locked up. There's only one big one remaining in Zachary Evans. And so we will obviously do another note on recruiting for 2020 when he decides to make his commitment, wherever that may be. So stay tuned. For our last segment, we're going to take a quick look at 2021, see how the classes are shaping up, who are some of the more notable early projections, and who is on the downslope in terms of maybe not being anywhere close to being where they typically are for the higher ranked teams. So stay tuned. We'll be right back and we'll talk about that next segment.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
All right, we are finishing up our recruiting recap for 2020, and now we're going to take a quick look at 2021, just to take an early look and see who perhaps is exceeding expectations so far and who is maybe slipping behind a little bit in terms of us taking a sneak peek at 2021. So the first three teams are not really a surprise to anyone. Out of the gate, we have Ohio State, Florida, and Clemson coming in at 1, 2, and 3. And to be honest, I would say Clemson probably should be number 2, considering that they have a 5-star and Florida doesn't. But Florida has signed 6 3-stars, which has bumped them slightly up over Clemson. But in terms of just pure quality, I would say Clemson probably has a little bit better of a class because they have that 5-star over Florida. At number 4 is the big surprise that we mentioned earlier in the show with North Carolina coming in, a total of 9 recruits, 1 3-star, 8 4-stars. At number 5, we have Notre Dame. I think that's good for them. They really need to get their recruiting back on track. It's been, I think, about the top 15 or out of the top 15 the last couple of years. Before that, they had a couple top 10 recruiting classes. So I'm pretty sure they would like to get back to being in the top 10 in terms of consistent recruiting year in and year out. Another big surprise so far looking at 2021 is the University of Miami. They are ranked number 6. They have 4 4-stars and 6 3-stars, which for them going forward, if they could be in the top 10 as well, it would be awesome to see them get back to college football prominence and perhaps be in a major bowl game every year. I think that would just be good for all the fans of college football, as well as the fact that they have struggled for so long and it almost feels like they are due in a way. At number 7, we have Wisconsin, which is a little surprising. I think if they could hold a top 10 spot, they would be very pleased with that. Texas comes in at number 8. They also have a 5-star recruit. The only other team to do so in the top 10 besides Ohio State and Clemson. Number 9, we have Iowa. That's good for them. I think they are deserving of a home run class here in the near future, or at least it feels that they are deserving of a good class considering how well they've done the past couple of years, and they still have not seemed to have those one or two classes that are home runs or where they exceed expectations. Number 10 is Maryland. I think if they could hold on to number 10, they would be very excited and very pleased with that. I'm sure that probably will not hold up as time goes on, though. Number 11 is Oregon. That's about right. They'll probably go up, actually, as the year goes on. Number 12 is Tennessee. Again, they were number 10 this year. If they could be number 12 next year, I think they would be happy with that. They have 1 4-star and 5 3-stars so far. Number 13 is a big surprise, Kansas State. I think if they could hold on to a top 15 or top 20 spot even, Kansas State would be extremely pleased with that. Minnesota is coming in at 14. I think that is deserving, especially if they have another good year this year. Then I actually think that 14, 15 spot for them would be a deserving spot and one that they probably should be at. Number 15 is USC. Again, it'd be nice to see USC to get back to top 15, top 10 recruiting classes every year. They are the next team to have a 5-star outside of the top 10. Then we have Cal at 16. I think if they could hold that spot, they would be extremely pleased, although I think they will probably fall as the year goes on. Number 17 is Georgia, but they also have a 5-star commit out of their total of 3 commits, 1 5-star, 1 4-star, 1 3-star. Georgia will obviously more than likely rise as the year goes on. Number 18 is Auburn. They will also probably go up as the year goes on. Number 19 is West Virginia, and I think if they could hold on to a top 20 spot, they would be extremely pleased with that as well. Number 20 is LSU. They also have a 5-star recruit, and they will obviously go up as the year goes on. Number 21 is Texas A&M, and while that might seem a little low, they have 3 recruits, and all of them are 4-stars so far, so that is a good start to the year, and obviously you expect them to probably make the top 10 again. 22 is Oklahoma, which again, they will obviously go up as the year goes on. 23 is Nebraska. If they could hold that 23, I think they would be happy with that. Also considering I don't think they're going to have the best year coming up, and so if they could hold on to a top 20 spot again, I think they would be happy with that and would probably take it. Number 24, we have Mississippi State. They have 4 3-stars. I expect them to probably go up this year with the addition of Mike Leach. I think he'll be able to do some good things in recruiting. 25 is Florida State, and it would be nice to see them get back to being a little bit better than 25. Top 20, I think, would be respectable for them right now if they could consistently hit that mark. 26 is Pittsburgh. That feels about right for them. I would like to see them in the top 25 every year or around the 25 number. 27 is Baylor. I expect them to obviously go up as the year goes on. 28 is Michigan. Same thing. I expect them to go up. They also have a 5-star recruit and 1 4-star. Number 29 is Duke. I think Duke would definitely take a top 30 if they could get it for next year, and so they are probably hoping to cling on to that 29 spot. 30 is Virginia Tech. 31 is Kansas. I think Kansas would love to have a top 30 recruiting class next year if they could have it. They have 4 3-stars so far. 32 is BYU. They would probably take that as well. 33 is Washington, but they do have a 5-star recruit in the bag, and so that 33 ranking will probably rise as they add more recruits to their list. 34 is Boston College. 35 Kentucky. 36 Missouri. 37 Iowa State. Then we have Colorado, Texas Tech. SMU coming in at number 40, 1 4-star, 1 3-star. That's extremely high for them. They would take a 40 spot if they could get it for 2021, guaranteed next year. Then we have Rutgers, which is very high for them as well at 41. Virginia, Penn State really down there at 43, but they'll rise as the year goes on. Georgia Tech at 44. They would probably take a top 40 if they could get it, or a top 50 they probably shouldn't be too unhappy with either. 45 is Purdue. 46 TCU. Temple coming in at 47, which I think they would take if they could keep that for next year. Alabama all the way down at 48. They have one commit, and it's a 4-star, so they are at least 1 for 1 in terms of getting a quality player, and they will obviously go up as the year goes on. Then to end it, we have Wake Forest and Arkansas, and that rounds out our top 50 for next year. And again, it's just an early look at next year just to see where teams are. Really, the only thing you're looking at this point in time is how many 5-stars and 4-stars you have if you're going to look this early into next year's recruiting class. Other than that, teams who have a bunch of 3-stars at this point is probably not relevant. But at the end of the day, if you're going to look that far ahead in terms of a year ahead in recruiting, really what you want to see is how many 5-stars and 4-stars they have this early, because that will probably bring their floor up and raise their ceiling in terms of the class that they can ultimately have. So that's going to do it for us this episode. We just want to do a quick recruiting recap of 2020. We will also do another note once Zachary Evans and a few others make their decisions on the universities that they will go to. And we also did a quick look at the 2021 rankings, even though it's obviously way too early. But again, it's always fun to look into the future and see what we think may happen. So thank you for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Please remember to like and subscribe to our show. Leave a comment or write a review. That always helps us. And if you could also please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That helps us to grow our footprint and get our name out there. And of course, as always, we appreciate that. So I want to thank you for listening. Have a good day or night wherever you are and whenever you listen to this. Thank you. Bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.